From as far back as I can remember, I have felt the need and desire to learn all that I can about ancient Egypt. I feel as though Egypt and its rich history are a part of my soul. I am standing here today in front of all of you to discuss this fabulous topic. Have you ever thought about what it would have been like for you to live during ancient Egyptian times? A time that was well before Christianity came into being? The ancient Egyptian civilization was one of the oldest and most powerful in the world, dating back over 3,000 years. The Egyptians believed that Egypt was the center of the universe and that no other culture could rival their own. Theirs was a proud and a fierce civilization, where pharaohs were treated like the deities they worshipped. Religion and the afterlife went hand in hand, and were an integral part of ancient Egyptian life. As such, many gods and goddesses were worshipped throughout an Egyptian's lifetime as a way to curry favor and lead to a beautiful afterlife. Royal Egyptian tombs were filled with food, grains, wine, water, furniture, and other such items to take with them on their journey into the afterlife. In looking at ancient Egyptian architecture, it appears that we, in today's society, are always looking to build things on a bigger, grander scale, whether it be skyscrapers, churches, bridges, houses, and the like. Are we, like the ancient Egyptians, trying to prove something to ourselves and others as to how high we can go and how big we can build things? What was the culture of ancient Egypt? It was ancient Egyptian architecture, such as homes and monuments, palaces and temples, language and writing, and ancient Egyptian religion. Two examples of exquisite ancient Egyptian architecture would be the Great Pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx, both of which still exist today and are a testament to the people who spent years building them. In ancient Egypt, there were two types of temple architecture that existed: cult temples and funerary temples. Cult temples showcased all of the images of the gods that were worshipped there, while funerary temples were shrines to deceased kings and queens, where their worshippers could go to pay homage to them. Most domiciles were modestly built with just a few rooms and had no indoor bathroom facilities. Palaces, of course, were extremely opulent, having such things as harem suites, kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms, and grand halls. Egyptian is one of the oldest known languages in the world. The ancient Egyptians spoke an Afro-Asiatic language, which is long extinct. With respect to ancient Egyptian writing, hieroglyphics were used when inscribing monuments, tombs of kings and queens, and temple walls, while cursive hieratic was used on such things as pottery and papyrus. Religion played an extremely key role in ancient Egypt. The Egyptian pharaohs were thought to be intermediaries between the general masses and the gods they worshipped. Egyptian religion changed a great deal over the 3,000 years in which it was practiced. Through it all, it was left up to the rulers of the land to ensure that religion stayed in the forefront of society. Egyptian gods took on many different forms. Two very important gods happened to be the god of the sun, Ra, and the god of the underworld, Osiris. As the ancient Egyptians were true believers in a solar cycle, light and dark, this is why Ra and Osiris were so vital and well thought of. To the ancient Egyptians, their culture was so important, and it has continued to play a key role in the ancient Egyptians' cultural evolution over thousands of years. As part of the cultural landscape, the burial rituals and customs of the ancient Egyptians showcased how they viewed death, not as an end to life, but to life eternal. What were the burial rituals and customs for ancient Egyptians? Mummification, burial ceremonies, customs and rituals, and burial masks. Mummification was not something that a lot of ancient Egyptians were able to have done, because it was quite costly and very elaborate to do. The ancient Egyptians believed that by preserving the body as much as possible, that this would allow the deceased individual to be able to live again in the afterlife. With mummification, the dead were first embalmed, so the body was washed with a special wine and then rinsed with water for purification purposes. An embalmer would then remove internal organs, such as the lungs, intestines, stomach, and liver, and then wash them before packing them in a natural salt for them to dry out. As for the brain, an embalmer used a long metal hook to go up into the nasal cavity to shake the deceased brain around, where it could be pulled out through the nostrils. The heart was never ever removed, because it was believed that the deceased would need it in the afterlife. Embalmers would then put natural salt into the deceased body to dry it out, and then leave it alone for 40 days, after which the body was cleansed again and oiled. The lungs, intestines, stomach, and liver were wrapped in linen strips and placed in canopic jars. The deceased body was then wrapped in strips of linen in a certain order, and amulets were placed between layers of linen for the deceased's safe journey into the afterlife. Spells were spoken by priests from the Egyptian Book of the Dead and added to scrolls and placed between the deceased's hands. Osiris, the god of the underworld, was painted onto a full-length cloth that was wrapped around the body, and then a plain cloth was put over that one with linen strips attached. Very elaborate burial ceremonies were performed for the pharaohs and other elite who could afford it. The mummy was then taken to its final resting place with family, friends, priests, and the deceased's precious items in tow. Numerous rites, rituals, and prayers were performed over many days, and all valuables of the deceased were placed inside the tomb, including food and water for the deceased to take with them on their journey into the afterlife. A painted wooden board was placed on top of the mummy before it was lowered into 2 sets of coffins. The coffins were then placed into a stone sarcophagus. It was left to Osiris to judge the deceased's heart on whether the deceased was worthy enough to be reborn into the afterlife. Family, friends, and priests would then exit the tomb, and it was sealed shut. Burial masks were vital, because the ancient Egyptians believed that the deceased spirit was able to locate and recognize his or her body in the afterlife, based on the face on the deceased person's burial mask. Burial masks contained inscriptions and spells for protecting the deceased spirit. The pharaoh's burial masks were made out of gold, as gold was thought to have magical powers and keep away evil spirits. The masks were encrusted with many jewels as well. Egyptian burial masks were meant to flatter the deceased person by making them as handsome or beautiful as possible, even if they were not that way when they were alive. Could this be why the ancient Egyptians were thought to be quite vain? Because they valued beauty to such a large extent? From ancient Egyptian architecture, language, writing, religion, mummification, burial ceremonies, customs, rituals, and burial masks, the Egyptians of old were a fascinating, unique, and very powerful civilization that dominated the land for over 3,000 years. Their religion was kept at the forefront of their society and never forgotten. Over thousands of years, Western civilization has continued to learn and grow, thanks in part to the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians of old strove hard to ensure that Egypt would always stay in the hearts and minds of everyone possible, leaving an indelible mark upon the world for all eternity.